This is the 8BitDo G-Bros adapter. 8BitDo put this out and announced it ahead of Smash Bros. And when I saw this, I thought, well, that's an interesting idea, but how well will it actually work when you're using it? And honestly, I'm a bit surprised because it works fairly well. Now, it's not perfect. I'm going to go through some of the drawbacks that this has, but this will actually allow you to not only make your GameCube controller wireless, it'll also give you access to your Super Nintendo and Nintendo Classic controllers and also make them wireless. Oh, and you can use it with your computer as well. First, an unboxing. Let's take this guy out of its box and see what we have in here and kind of talk about what we have as we go along. So, the 8BitDo G-Bros adapter is its own little accessory that is an attachment for controllers that you might want to use with your Switch or your PC. It's pretty clear it's geared towards Nintendo-based products as they use the color scheme from the Gamecube, as it seems to mostly be geared towards Gamecube as becoming a wireless controller. You can use your older Gamecube controllers with it, or you can use your newer ones that have come out recently, or even the ones I guess they released in 2014. So you get this adapter. You also get a micro USB to USB Type A, very small cable. I'm going to talk about why that is here in a second as well, and what you'd even need this for, because at first I wasn't really sure what I needed it for, and then I played around with it a bit and figured out what it actually does. And then we have our instructions here that pretty much show you what everything does. Let's take a look around the 8BitDo adapter. We have our buttons on the top here. One is a sync button there. It looks kind of like the C-stick from the GameCube. Then we have an S and an X switch, which will let you switch between Switch and Windows. So it has two different settings there, depending on how you're using it. It also has a red button and then a star button there. Now, basically, you have your home and your snapshot button for the Switch. And I guess I'm trying to think what it'd be for Windows, maybe the Windows button. I really never had to press them, and when I did, it didn't really do much. But you do have buttons that are added to your GameCube controller that will allow you to navigate menus that are not there already. So they thought about a few things about how to make that work. On one side, we have the connection for the GameCube controller, and then on the other side, we have Nintendo's expansion socket there that would allow you to plug in your Super Nintendo Classic, your Nintendo Classic, your wired Pro controller that you might have used on your Wii. Basically, anything that will plug in here controller-wise will then be picked up as a Pro controller, and then of course you have extra buttons here, so it doesn't necessarily need to have all of the buttons that would be on a standard Pro controller. So kinda cool there to be able to use any controller you want. Now, how does this work exactly? Well, you put it into S mode, you hit the sync button, and then you sync it up to your Switch. You put it in X mode, it also still uses Bluetooth, so technically it can pick up that way. Or if you just want to plug it into your USB socket and have this as basically a connector to allow you to plug either of those kind of controllers in, it has a USB port on the side here that you would then plug this in. That goes to your computer, and then you have a way to plug in either one. I've noticed that if you have both plugged in, the expansion port takes precedence over the GameCube port. So if you have them both plugged in, this port will work. You unplug it, all of a sudden this one works fine. So if you try to plug them both in, you won't actually be able to use both. You'll have to pick one. So the one thing that I noticed right away when I picked it up, it's fairly light. Why is it light? Well, it takes AA batteries. Yes, that's right. That's going to turn people off immediately, I understand. And to be honest, because this is a separate accessory and it's not really something you think of when it comes to batteries or charging, I would prefer to have a built-in rechargeable battery that you just plug into the side, considering they already have the USB port there. Like, it's already there, so you figure you plug it in. No, you need to have AA batteries. Fortunately, I have several, and I'll need to put some in while we go ahead and test this guy out. Okay, so we have the Switch, the adapter, and then I also have a GameCube controller that we'll test out. This is one of the newer ones that you can pick up in stores now. Wired GameCube controller. I also have a controller for my Super Nintendo Classic that we'll try out. We'll hook that up as well. And then the one drawback outside of the batteries that kind of annoyed me is this 8BitDo does this with their controllers or their adapters, probably because it works for a range of controllers and it works as well for Windows. This cannot turn the Switch on, which is still a bummer, considering you need to grab your Joy-Con controller or you need to grab a Pro controller to turn your Switch on if you're across the room, and then you can sync this up. Again, a little thing for some people, but for me, that's actually kind of big, considering there are wireless GameCube controllers now for example, we did the one from PowerA that does turn it on. A lot of controllers do that now, so kind of a shame that 8BitDo is still kind of behind the curve on that one. So we're going to turn it on with a Joy-Con controller, and that will allow me to sync everything up from there. So I've powered it on, I just pressed the red button, and it already was synced up to my Switch. Basically, I had to go into the controls menu, hit the yellow button, it would start blinking, and eventually it would find it. It only took a few seconds, so it was pretty quick. So this is now synced up. This is found as a Pro controller, and it passes through. So we'll take that now, and we'll plug in and try out, I guess, some Smash. Okay, so here we go. We got this guy. We'll plug it into the side here. And if everything is working correctly, this should just start. Yeah, there we go. So now it's working fine. And I guess we'll jump into Smash and see how everything goes. So one thing I noticed is when you first plug it in, it sees it as a Pro controller, which means you need to kind of go in and play around with the options because it doesn't necessarily see it as a GameCube controller, which means you're going to have to play around with some of the controls. So let me go in here and I'll show you what I mean. It's not, if you see here, it's not using the GameCube controller, it's using either the split Joy-Cons and the grip, the Pro controller, or the Switch in handheld mode, which means that L and R, which these show up as, is actually shown as grab, so you can't technically shield with these two as you'd want to, and then maybe grab with this one. So you kind of have to go in. Fortunately, they make it easier to do this, and I actually saw on their website that there is a button combination in order to, there we go, grab. So now that should be fine. I'm gonna go ahead and test it, but that should make it so that now I have shield here and grab here. So that's a bit more how we'd want it to be, right? This does also support rumble, as it actually was rumbling as I hit things. So it has support for all of that as well, and the latency isn't too bad. It's actually pretty good overall. As you can see, it's not bad at all for lag or latency or anything, and it works pretty well, actually. I'm just kind of playing around in training mode, but once you fix that, it works well. And of course, it's wireless, so you should be good. Because this is Bluetooth, they say it's good about 30 feet or so. Most people aren't sitting that far away from their TV, but if you have a larger TV and you don't want to have a wired GameCube controller running all the way across your floor, and even if you can reach it there with the adapter, this would actually work really well for that. Just keep in mind one thing about this adapter. It's $20, whereas if you buy the 4-port GameCube controller adapter, that's also 20 bucks. So if you want to use 4 controllers, all wireless, you're going to end up spending about 80 bucks to need 4 of these. So keep that in mind. There is some convenience factor there, obviously, because it's wireless. And I guess if it's just you playing at home, this actually makes sense for you. And if I want to go home, that does work to do that. So you do still have to kind of grab this and press the button, and then that's a snapshot. So how about this? How about we now sync up our Classic controller, and we'll play around with some of the NES games with it. So we take the Classic controller. You can plug these on the fly. You don't have to turn this off and on to make it work. So I'll actually plug this guy in just like that with it still on. So I just unplugged the GameCube controller, plug this one in, and now we're rolling with our Super Nintendo Classic controller that people may prefer. You can, of course, also use the NES controller if you would like, and that'll work fine as well. We got a little update here, so I'm gonna go ahead and let that update, and then we'll jump in. So it looks like they added like a special edition of like the special thing for Metroid, Dr. Mario. So they added a few things there. We also have Ninja Gaiden and Wario's Woods and Lolo. But yeah, now I'm actually just using the D-pad on the Super Nintendo Classic, which some people may prefer. You can also use your NES Classic then controllers with this, which means that you don't necessarily need Nintendo's wireless controllers that they're selling to use their licensed NES controller. Just with this, it'll make it wireless and everything as well, and maybe prefer the NES Classic controller. Technically grab that, grab this, and all of a sudden you're rolling along there. This will also give a little bit of a, I guess, a future-proof just in case they do add Super Nintendo games. You have a Super Nintendo controller right here that you can use. So that's something I really liked about this. Not necessarily that you can use just GameCube controllers, but they have that expansion port on the side. So I can go into a Zelda, for example, and here I am using a Super Nintendo controller to play it, which means, of course, that if Link to the Past shows up, I'm already set here. And of course, I can grab an NES Classic controller, plug it in, and I'm off and running. And then, of course, while we're here, we might as well take it apart, although I don't think we're going to find anything crazy inside of this guy. More than likely, it's a board with a Bluetooth receiver, and then probably wires going off to these ports, which probably have their own boards most likely. But let's take it apart. It'll be pretty quick and easy to do this, because I saw that there are 4 screws on the back, 4 Phillips head screws. You know, I was also thinking about that small cable, the micro USB to Type A. And I was thinking they might also use that for updating the firmware as well. Like if you have any bugs or issues with it, you would report it to them, or they would figure out in their testing as they go along, and then they would update this. They could also maybe update it to have better compatibility with Windows, or even with the Switch. They've updated some of their other controllers as they've gone along, and you just update the firmware. So if they did something like that with this one, that's actually pretty cool, because for the most part, it's a good foundation for what it is. Oh, it's clipped in. Okay, so the top is actually clipped in here. I'll just use a little card to get under here. Let's see if we can pop this guy free, because you can feel it's clipped, although I already undid the screws. So let's see if we can make our way in on one of these sides. Okay, so we're in on this side, and we should be able to kind of roll around here. By the way, if you ever have like as you see here, like a hotel key card that you end up keeping because it's basically just like a very thin credit card, these actually work really well as little mini spudgers to get around certain things you have to open. So I actually keep them just for that reason. Put them in a drawer with like spudgers, and you got yourself a nice thing that you can use to kind of wedge in between these spots and run along. So yeah, it looks like it was just clipped in with those 4 screws helping to hold it in. And we can see right away once you open it, you have all of your buttons still stuck to the top minus this switch. And then we have our board underneath that looks like it's just sitting in there, because the 4 screws do go through all of the sides there. The 4 screws from the bottom and screw into the top there. And of course, it's also clipped in, so everything kind of works together. Tactile buttons for the red, green, and yellow, whether it's the sync button, home button, or the snapshot button. And then this is just a little switch with a little selection switch right underneath. And then this just kind of peels up, it looks like. Yes. And then on the bottom, underneath of it, we can actually see the ports there. And they are on their own separate board. So it's a pretty straightforward idea here. Nothing crazy going on in there, and it's $20. So I wasn't expecting to find anything insane, but still interesting to see kind of how they set that up at like a right angle on either side. And then of course we have our Bluetooth chip and antenna right there for connection. So overall, yeah, looks good. You probably won't have a lot of interference anyway, because this is against plastic and it's right at the top on this top corner part. So if anything, I guess don't hold it like this. Although I don't know why you would when you're playing, because it's usually just going to sit on the table. So I'll admit, I was a little surprised with how well this guy works. Now, when plugging into the PC, it was kind of a mixed bag. For example, I was having an issue getting it to work in Dolphin. Maybe you want to emulate some games there, whereas it worked fine in like a Super Nintendo emulator. It was all over the place kind of there. They didn't seem to have any drivers that you could download for it, and when I plugged it in, it found it as an Xbox 360 controller, which is odd, but again, that might have just been Windows recognizing it as what they could recognize it as, and there might be some third-party programs that would make it work. We just have to do some more testing and see if anyone even maybe wants to make a driver for this. I'd like 8BitDo to do that, but again, we'll see. Otherwise, though, it works great for the Switch. It does work for Windows, but there's a bit more work to do there. And the fact that you have this expansion port means that you can, of course, use the Wii Classic controller that a lot of people used from the Virtual Console back in the day, Super Nintendo Classic, Nintendo Classic, N64 Classic controller maybe, we'll see. And of course, your Gamecube controllers work fine. Detect it as a Pro controller, and then remaps the buttons for whatever controller you're using. Pretty cool stuff there by 8BitDo, and at $20, it's not a bad deal. The removable batteries, I would have preferred to see them just be rechargeable. They say you get anywhere from 20 to 30 hours from 2 AA's, but still, you have to keep buying AA's for it. So let me know what you guys think about that one. And guys, that's going to do it for the 8BitDo G-Bros controller. Let me know what you think about this, because technically it is a controller, I guess, considering the Switch finds it as a Pro controller, but lets you use all kinds of stuff and tons of versatility there. Thanks guys for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit the like button, it does help out. I'll leave a link down below to an Amazon listing for this guy so you can learn more information there as well. And I'll see you guys in the next video.